And what did they get me? Malibu Barbie. That's not what I wanted. That's not who I was. Graceful, delicate. Andrew, and this is Gayties Toys. When the cold open has nothing to do with the subject, that's the professionalism we bring here. On today's MIA 80s Ladies, where we talk about all the ladies from the 80s that never actually got action figures, we're going back to the Turtles well. I said in my last Ninja Turtles video, I think I was kind of done with the whole franchise, but there are two characters I still kind of want to get into, and they're quite obscure, but at the very least, they briefly had a shot at, so let's just get right into Ninjara and Maligna from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Adventures. If you're watching this channel, I'm going to assume that you probably know what a Ninja Tortoise is, so I don't really need to get into all that. But importantly, we have to go back to the kickoff of, the Ninja Mania that was happening in 1987. Basically, it wasn't necessarily an overnight success, but it certainly, once it hit, we were insatiable. We wanted more, and that's where you saw a real influx of, cookies, pencil sets, coloring books, everything. Everyone was just scrambling to get product out the door. And one important marketing component to most brands from the 80s and 90s was a comic book to accompany the franchise. In this regard, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were quite unique in this circumstance, in the sense that there was a comic originally. This is where it all spawned from. That said, that comic from Mirage Studios was, let's say, a little more adult-oriented, much more bloody, violent, not exactly geared towards kids, and certainly not within the universe of the cartoon. So what had happened to, sort of combat this and get something not in comic book stores, but rather on newsstands, at grocery stores, was to get two guys from Mirage Comics to create a comic based around the universe of the Fred Wolf series, and then put that out via Archie Comics, thereby, sort of skirting the comic book shops, getting it, in more kids' hands, because again, insatiable. Well, the Adventure Comics did, at least kick off with essentially a retelling of the first couple of episodes from the cartoon series. They also very quickly veered off in their own direction, in their own continuity, basically their own universe, in the many multiverses of the Turtles timelines. This series very much dealt more with, let's say, animal rights, a lot of environmentalism, and really sort of took characters more so from the Playmates toy line than the Turtles cartoon itself. Within the Turtles cartoon, a lot of characters, even if they were, good guys in the toy line, were kind of one and done. Usually, villains or adversaries, very much off model from the toy, but Archie Comics at the very least really tried to sort of build them up, as well as other characters. If you read it, it's really good. It does wonders for Shredder, for April. these are niche. It's a niche thing, but it's a good read. I recommend it. There are a few characters from this series that I wouldn't mind, sort of talking about and doing their own video, but I'm picking two in particular for, a good reason we'll get to. That's not to put down Cherube, who I absolutely would love to see as an action figure, or say Azrael, but we're focusing on Maligna and Ninjara here. One being, sort of a one-time villain, the other being a very important character to this overall, series. We'll start with Ninjara, who made her first appearance in issue number 28. She started off very much as a villain, as the name implies. A ninja, an assassin, a thief. She was in cahoots with Shane Khan, who's sort of like a pit bull demon hybrid. That said, once his master plan was sort of unveiled, finally she realized the error of her ways and joined forces with the Turtles. And not only that, but returned from their adventures in Japan to New York. Interesting fact about her is that she wasn't actually a mutant, but rather a fox person from some, hidden island off the coast of Japan. When in New York, she and Raphael, eventually formed a relationship, which was, quite odd and rare at that time, but it was very much a foundation of the series going forward. And she really was a component, a core member of the Turtles team from that point forward, right until the end, when eventually, she and Raphael would break up, and their story wouldn't be resolved before, the series got canceled. Before we really get into Maligna, a quick little sidebar here, and that being Mighty Mutanimals. If you know, you know. They were, like mentioned before, a lot of the sort of one-off characters from the cartoons, a lot of the toys, especially early on, who were sort of, within the superhero camp, but weren't Ninja Turtles, weren't actually, sort of deserving of necessarily their own title or, star billing in a Ninja Turtle comic. But that said, they got a lot more love in the series. There was a few new ones, added that never made toys themselves, who we'll get to them as well. The Mighty Mutant Turtles were formed really, amidst a brewing subplot within the series where there was an incoming alien invasion, and you had characters like, Manta Ray and Wingnut and Screwloose and Leatherneck and a bunch of others who kind of formed their own little kind of side mutant Justice League kind of thing. They started off with a 3-issue miniseries and eventually would spawn into another series that was quite short-lived, I believe maybe 9 issues. We'll get into that as well in a bit. Between the Adventures series proper and the Mighty Mutant Turtles miniseries, the actual plot of this alien invasion was finally realized, and that's where we finally met the big boss of the whole invasion, Maligna. She was a character who was, pretty paint by numbers, just big, bad, evil villain kind of thing. Not a lot to her character, but very much a terrifying force. She was someone who, had sort of this hive mind over her insect babies. She ate people alive, which I found very unnerving at the time. Her thing is really more her design. She was, incredibly tall, very intricate, very colorful, very menacing, and very much, I wouldn't say necessarily a departure from the animated series, but very much something that was certainly from this series. And she's become a fan favorite despite not being around very much or what have you. And I think it's really based very strongly off of her design alone. The Mighty Mutant Turtles might not have been the highest selling of the Archie Turtle series, of which there were many kind of spin-offs and one-offs and what have you. But they did have a pretty fervent fan base, and there was certainly interest for an animated series. The actual creators of the Mutanimals, Brown and Levine, were certainly kind of pitching this or giving updates in the letter columns of the actual comic proper. However, it didn't seem to go very far until, much more recently, where we actually got sort of more information, where they had sort of gotten interest from Ruby Spears, weirdly enough, but not Fred Wolf. So there were some, images drawn up, sort of character designs. Very, very importantly, and sort of putting a bow on all this, is that both Ninjara and Maligna would have been part of this cartoon. Ninjara, despite not being part of the Mutanimals in the comics, was going to be, the girl character for the series, while likewise Maligna would be one of the big bads in lieu of, Shredder or Krang. From these images, we see, a lot of real who's who from the comic book, and the designs very much steer, in that direction, much more so than the Fred Wolf cartoon. And I think this is where the real problem kind of arose, is that this probably would not have been a spin-off of the very popular Ninja Turtles cartoon. This was not a Fred Wolf jam. It was being, sort of considered by maybe not a rival company, but a different company. So really, between rights, between, Playmates not really terribly interested in the sense that they were like, we already made these toys, and they basically look like our toys already, so why would we do this again? So, eventually within the letter columns, the creators would sort of say, look, we gave it a go. It didn't pan out, but this is really, in terms of this series, and really where I kind of put these above some other characters from the Archie Comics run. I mean, these two sort of at least had a shot, and especially considering they were never in a cartoon. Almost, but we're never actually in a cartoon. It's like, it was sort of a real bit of a jab for those of us who were a fan of this comic book series, where, we almost got a real taste of this cartoon in, a more legitimate fashion, that being TV. In terms of final verdicts, this one's very much tentative, particularly at the time of recording. So, within the Ninja Turtles universe, there's been sort of certainly like homages, there's been appearances from these characters. I would say, like the Mighty Mutanimals of them, despite being all men and not really pertinent to the series, but still an important footnote, in different iterations have certainly made appearances, be it IDW, be it some of the spin-off cartoons. They've had different, iterations over the years, so they've kind of endured, albeit very, very much kind of like a wink, nudge, kind of thing to the fans. For Maligna and Ninjara specifically, I mean, Ninjara at the very least made a non-playable appearance in the Shredder's Revenge game. Both characters were, at least made some kind of like appearances in the IDW comics. Ninjara, in particular, was an interesting one in the sense that the brand new character, alllmost, a white fox, people kind of believe to be sort of a stand-in for Ninjara in the sense that she sort of like appeared to start off as a good guy and then became a bad guy and also had a romantic lead with Raphael. However, Ninjara herself actually did later make an appearance in the comic books themselves. So the two characters likewise had a bit of a spar near the end of that run. So I mean, very interesting, kind of comparisons and alliterations with another character who at least we did get a figure of thanks to the loyal subjects. In terms of modern figures of these characters nowadays, that's a big question mark time of recording. So essentially, NECA Toys famously, gloriously have been making cartoon Ninja Turtles for many years now, and they're fantastic. I've got a few up here somewhere. But that said, they've only kind of in recent years sort of started dipping into the Archie-verse. So they started with essentially, the Mighty Mutanimals. They did characters like Jaguar that weren't ever done before, kind of thing. We actually did start to really kind of build out a team for that. Not a lot, not a huge rollout of them, but I mean, and I'm certainly one who wants more. But this year, 2026, we were sort of told that Playmates, after all these years, was losing the license. So this is now going to Mattel starting 2027. So all of the other turtle licenses out there that are being sub-licensed from Playmates is now in question, and that includes NECA. So I don't have inside knowledge, and I have no vision into the future whether NECA that's been terminated or whether they have to renegotiate with Mattel or what's going on with that. But the actual future of the NECA Turtles line as it is very up in the air at this time. And if you can't tell, for me, that sucks, because I wanted these two characters. We certainly got some teases from NECA for more within this universe. There was sort of a tease for Cuddly the Cow. Somehow they were planning to make that. Last April 1st in 2025, they had sort of mentioned that they were going to do an Archie April, announced on April Fool's no less. That did not materialize in this past year. I'm not sure if that's been shelved or, again, awaiting to see what the future brings for the line. But for Ninjara and Maligna specifically, I'm very kind of like, I really wanted these. I was really, had my eye on these when they started dabbling in the Mighty Mutanimals. Ninjara, I mean, she's an interesting one because, the creators of it pose a bit of a Usagi Yojimbo problem, if you catch my drift. So like Viacom, when they purchased Turtles in 2009, they purchased all of it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have like access to Usagi Yojimbo. They still have to go and talk to the creator about that. Ninjara, I mean, she had her own spin-off series shortly after the end of the Archie runs, and there's no real, she's definitely a property of Viacom, but there's some legal problems there that, some fans have sort of theorized that like maybe it's a little difficult for NECA or, Nickelodeon or whoever wants to do anything with Ninjara to do so, at least not without paying the creators. I can't find hard evidence of this, but it's certainly the most popular fan theory. For Maligna, here's the cold hard truth. She is probably a very tall figure, probably a very expensive figure, probably a very crazy, articulated, many paint apps kind of figure. She's for a character who's not that popular, or at least well known, that's a big gamble. And that boo-hoo for the companies. But I mean, I can see the hesitancy in doing that. But that said, I mean, that's another one who would really like pop on a shelf. So I'm hoping this continues, but we will see in 2027, I guess. Also, I haven't really done Custom Corner in a while, so if you are really, a mega fan, if you're dying for a Ninjara figure, there is one really good option out there, and that is by DeFoot, who I will link below in the description. He does a lot of sort of one-off customs, but very well made, very well painted customs of Turtles, including many of the Mutanimals, but he did one for Ninjara, who is in that very kind of squat Playmates style, and she's spectacular, and I've been eyeing her for a long time, so we'll see if I actually pull the trigger eventually. But there you go. If you're a diehard, there's an option. Might not be legitimate, but it's a damn good one. And that'll do it for Ninjara, Maligna, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles until I change my mind and come back to it again in the future. So I want to thank you for watching, for liking, for commenting, subscribing, all those YouTube-y things, and I will see you next time on MIA 80s Ladies.